She had been looking forward to that night for weeks. A birthday party, family all around, her boyfriend's hand in hers. It was supposed to be warm. It was supposed to be safe. But before that night was over, one moment, one decision by someone she had been told to trust would split her life into two halves, the before and the everything after. And here is what haunts you when you hear this story. The music never stopped playing, not once, not even after it happened. The party kept going, and Rachel stood alone in the hallway of someone else's home, trying to make sense of something that should never have happened at all.
Before we begin, let me know in the comment where you're watching from. Would love to hear from you, and your support helps this story reach more people who need to hear it. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos.
Rachel Holden was 24 years old, and by most people's definition, she was doing just fine. She had a steady job at a medical billing office in Columbus, Ohio, a small apartment she had decorated with second-hand furniture and string lights, and a circle of close friends she had known since college. She was the kind of person who remembered birthdays without being reminded, who always had an extra umbrella in her bag, and who laughed at her own jokes before she even finished telling them. People liked Rachel. More than that, people trusted her. And she, in turn, trusted people. That was just who she was. It was part of her warmth. It was also, she would later realize, something that certain people knew how to take advantage of. She had been dating a man named Aaron Graves for just over a year when this story begins.
Aaron was 30 years old, worked in logistics, and had the kind of steady, unhurried energy that Rachel had found calming from the very first date. He was not flashy. He was not the kind of man who made grand romantic gestures or filled rooms with his presence, but he was consistent. He showed up when he said he would. He called when he said he would call. And in Rachel's experience, that kind of reliability was rarer than most people understood. She had met his mother twice before the birthday party. She had met his cousins at a cookout the previous summer. She had been folded slowly into the edges of his family's life, and it had felt natural. It had felt right. She never once had a reason to feel unsafe around any of them. And that is exactly what made what happened so devastating.
Aaron had a younger brother. His name was Jeremy Graves, and he was 26. If you had asked anyone at that party to describe Jeremy before that night, most of them would have struggled to say very much at all. He was just there. He was the kind of person who existed at the edges of gatherings, never quite part of the conversation, but never far from it either. He worked odd hours at a warehouse outside the city and lived with his mother in the house where he and Aaron had grown up. He did not have many friends that Rachel ever heard mentioned. He wasn't mean, he wasn't loud, he didn't make scenes. He was just quiet in a way that was easy to overlook and easier to excuse. Rachel had met Jeremy maybe 5 or 6 times before that birthday party.
She had not thought much about him. You know how it is. When you meet a partner's family, you form impressions quickly. Some people you immediately warm up to, some you feel neutral about. Jeremy fell into that second category for Rachel. There was nothing specific she could point to, no moment where he had said something that bothered her, but there were small things she had filed away without meaning to. The way his eyes tracked her when she walked into a room. The way he sometimes lingered in doorways during family conversations rather than sitting down. A comment he made once, something about her smile that Aaron had laughed off and that Rachel had decided not to make a thing of. She had told herself she was being unfair. She had told herself she was reading too much into it. And in the absence of any clear warning, she had let it go. Looking back later, she would understand something that most of us only learn the hard way, that discomfort is information, that the body often knows things before the mind is willing to name them.
The birthday party was for Aaron's mother, Linda. She was turning 60, and the family had planned a proper celebration. Nothing over the top, just a gathering at the family home with extended relatives, neighbors, and a few close family friends. There were maybe 30 people there by 8 o'clock that evening. Someone had set up a Bluetooth speaker in the living room. There was a folding table in the backyard stacked with foil pans of food. The kitchen smelled like birthday cake and something being reheated in the oven. That specific, comforting smell that clings to family kitchens and doesn't exist anywhere else. Rachel had brought flowers and a card she had spent 20 minutes choosing.
She helped set out napkins and paper plates when she arrived. She made small talk with Aaron's aunts. She sat next to him at the table and felt genuinely like she belonged there. That feeling, that warmth, that easy sense of inclusion is important to hold on to as this story continues, because it is exactly the kind of feeling that makes what happens next so hard to process. When you feel safe somewhere, when you have been welcomed and included, your guard comes down. Not because you are careless, but because you are human. Rachel was not naive. She was not reckless. She was a young woman at a birthday party for her boyfriend's mother, surrounded by people she had come to consider extended family. There was no reason, not one reason, that she should have been anything other than relaxed that evening. And for the first 2 hours, she was.
It was somewhere around the second hour of the party, maybe 9:30, maybe closer to 10, when Rachel first noticed a shift. It was not dramatic. It was not a single moment she could point to. It was more like a slow accumulation of small things that, taken individually, meant nothing, but that together began to press against her in a way she couldn't quite shake. Jeremy had been nearby more than she expected. Every time she looked up, he seemed to be within a few feet of her, at the drink table, near the back door when she had stepped outside for some air, standing by the kitchen counter when she went to refill a glass of water. He made conversation, and on the surface it was normal conversation. He asked about her job, made a comment about the food, laughed at something someone across the room said. But there was something in the way he positioned himself, something in the way he leaned slightly too close when he spoke to her, as if he wanted to create a sense of privacy in a room full of people. She stepped back. He didn't seem to notice, or maybe he noticed and simply didn't care. She told herself she was overthinking it. She told herself that not every awkward interaction meant something. She went back to the living room and sat beside Aaron, and she smiled, and she had another piece of birthday cake, and she almost convinced herself that what she was feeling was just the particular anxiety that sometimes came with being around people you were still getting to know. But the feeling didn't go away. It sat quietly behind her sternum for the rest of the evening. And your instincts, as Rachel would later say, your instincts know before your mind is ready to catch up. It was close to 11 when Rachel excused herself from a conversation with Aaron's aunt and headed toward the hallway bathroom. The back hallway of the house was narrow and dim, only one light fixture, and it was casting that particular yellowish glow that cheap bulbs produce when they're near the end of their life. The bathroom door was at the far end. The hallway itself was separated from the main living area by a half wall and a corner, which meant that for the few seconds it took to walk from one end to the other, you were effectively out of sight of the rest of the party. Rachel had made this same walk twice already that evening and thought nothing of it. She should not have had to think anything of it. She was almost at the bathroom door when she heard footsteps behind her. She assumed it was one of the kids. There were 2 young cousins at the party, maybe 8 or 9 years old, who had been running through the house all evening.
She turned around, and it was not one of the kids, it was Jeremy. He was standing in the middle of the hallway, blocking the way back. He said something to her. She would later describe it as a comment, something that felt like a setup for what came next, and before she could respond, before she could fully process what was happening, he stepped forward and crossed a line. What exactly happened in that hallway is Rachel's story to carry, and it is not for anyone else to put words around. What matters is this: something was done to her without her consent, something she did not want, something she did not ask for, something that no amount of prior relationship, prior familiarity, or prior access ever entitled anyone to do. She froze. Her body did what bodies do under sudden shock. It locked. Her mind went somewhere separate from the moment, the way a person sometimes leaves a situation before they can physically leave it.
It lasted only seconds, and then Jeremy walked back toward the party as if nothing had happened at all. Rachel stood in that hallway for a long moment after he left. She could hear the music from the living room. She could hear laughter, someone telling a story in a loud voice, the sound of ice hitting a glass. The party was still going. 30 people, 20 feet away, and not one of them had any idea. She did not cry, not yet. The crying would come later, in her own apartment, alone at 2 in the morning with the lights on because she couldn't stand the dark. In that hallway, she felt something else, a profound and disorienting confusion, the kind that comes not just from what happened, but from the gap between the world as it was a few minutes ago and the world as it suddenly was now. She fixed her expression. She walked back into the party. She sat down next to Aaron, and she smiled at something his uncle was saying, and she laughed on cue, and she counted the minutes until it was socially acceptable to say she was tired and needed to get home.
She did not look in Jeremy's direction for the rest of the night. She was afraid of what she would see on his face, and she was more afraid that it would be nothing at all, that he would just be standing there eating birthday cake and looking like a regular person, which is exactly what he was doing. Ask yourself right now, what would you have done in that moment? What do you do when something shatters you inside and the whole world keeps moving around you as if nothing changed? That is the question Rachel was sitting with as she hugged Aaron's mother goodbye and thanked her for having her, and walked to her car in the cold November air and drove home in silence. If you've made it this far into this story, I want you to comment the words "stay safe" in the comments below. Stories like this are hard to sit with. They're supposed to be, because the discomfort you're feeling right now is the beginning of awareness. And what happened next, the moment Rachel decided to speak, made everything even harder. Don't go anywhere. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Rachel spent 3 days sitting with what had happened before she said a word to anyone. 3 days of going to work and answering emails and eating lunch at her desk and responding to texts from Aaron about how the party had gone. 3 days of telling herself she should say something, followed immediately by every reason not to. What if he didn't believe her? What if he thought she had misread the situation? What if this ended the relationship? What if it ended worse than that? What if it poisoned the entire family, turned people against each other, and Rachel was the one left standing in the wreckage holding the match that started it? These are not irrational fears. They are the exact fears that keep the vast majority of people who experience what Rachel experienced from ever saying a word. According to research compiled by the U.S. Department of Justice's Office on Violence Against Women, survivors of assault by known individuals, partners, family members, acquaintances, frequently delay or entirely forego reporting because of the social complexity involved. They fear they won't be believed. They fear retaliation. They fear being made to feel responsible for something that was done to them. Rachel was afraid of all of those things. But on the 3rd day, sitting in her apartment with her phone in her hand and Aaron's contact pulled up on the screen, she decided that carrying it alone was heavier than the risk of telling him. She typed out a message asking if he could come over. He was there within the hour. She told him everything. She spoke clearly and without drama. She laid out what had happened in that hallway, step by step, as plainly as she could manage. And she watched Aaron's face as she talked. First, there was shock, real, visible shock, the kind that changes a person's features all at once. And then, something else came after it. A hesitation, a long silence, and then the words that broke something else inside her entirely. "Are you sure that's what he meant to do?" That question, 5 words, and in that moment, Rachel realized that speaking up had not given her the relief she was hoping for. It had only opened a second wound.
what followed over the next several weeks was not a single dramatic confrontation. It was something quieter and in many ways harder to process, a slow erosion. Aaron told his mother told other family members, and the story, as it traveled through the family, began to change shape in the way stories do when people are protecting someone they love at the expense of someone they should have been protecting instead. Jeremy denied it. Of course he denied it. He said Rachel had misunderstood. He said she was exaggerating. He said he barely remembered even being in that hallway, which was its own particular kind of cruelty, to tell a person that the worst moment of their recent life barely registered as a memory for the person who caused it. Aaron's mother said she found it hard to believe Jeremy would do something like that. One of the aunts suggested that Rachel might have been drinking too much that evening, even though Rachel had had 1 glass of wine the entire night. No one said directly that they thought Rachel was lying, but no one said clearly that they believed her either. And in the silence between those two positions, Rachel was left completely alone. She sat in that silence for a long time, and what she understood, slowly, painfully, and with a clarity that only comes through that kind of pain, was that the family's instinct to protect their own had won out over the truth. Not because they were evil people, not because they were incapable of empathy, but because believing Rachel fully would have required them to see Jeremy as someone capable of something terrible, and they were not ready to do that.
They chose comfort over honesty, and Rachel paid the price for their choice. If you've ever told someone a hard truth and watched them choose not to hear it, you know exactly what that feels like. Now imagine the truth you're telling is about your own body, about your own safety, about something that was done to you. How would you hold up under the weight of not being believed? Rachel and Aaron did not survive what happened. They tried, briefly. There were conversations that stretched late into the night. There were moments where Aaron seemed to be coming around, where he seemed to be choosing her, where he seemed to understand that his doubt had hurt her almost as much as the original incident. But Jeremy was still there, at family dinners, at Sunday visits, at the holidays that Rachel had been quietly looking forward to for months.
Aaron could not or would not cut himself off from his family, and Rachel could not keep walking into that house and sitting across the table from the person who had violated her trust and her safety, watching him be passed the breadbasket and asked about work like nothing had ever happened. She ended the relationship in January. It was one of the harder things she had ever done because she had genuinely loved Aaron, and some part of her understood that he had been placed in an impossible position by his own family. But loving someone does not require you to keep accepting less than you deserve, and Rachel had come to understand something important about herself in the months since that birthday party. She had a spine.
She had a voice, and she was not going to spend one more day making herself smaller to fit inside someone else's unwillingness to face the truth. She began therapy in February. She went once a week, then twice during the harder stretches. She found a therapist who specialized in trauma and who, on their very first session, said something Rachel would think about for a long time afterward. What happened to you does not define you, but how you move forward from it can. She also, eventually, reported what had happened to local authorities, not because she expected a clean resolution, not because she was certain the justice system would deliver what she deserved, but because she wanted it on record. She wanted there to be a document somewhere that said, "This happened. Rachel Holden said it happened, and she told the truth." Here is what Rachel's story asks of all of us. Not every danger announces itself from across the room. Not every threat comes from a stranger in the dark. Sometimes it comes from the person sitting at the same birthday table as you. Sometimes it wears the face of someone you've been told to welcome. And sometimes, far too often, when a person finds the courage to speak up about what was done to them, the people they tell respond with doubt instead of support.
Research from the National Domestic Violence Hotline and the Department of Justice consistently shows that survivors of assault by known individuals are among the least likely to report and among the most likely to be disbelieved when they do. The fear of not being believed is not paranoia. It is a fear born from pattern, from experience, from stories like Rachel's, repeated across communities, across socioeconomic lines, across every demographic you can name. So what can we actually do? We can start by listening, fully, without the instinct to protect our own comfort or our existing image of a person we thought we knew. We can choose, when someone we care about comes to us with something difficult, to lead with belief instead of doubt. We can remind ourselves that the statistics on false reports are overwhelmingly in favor of survivors telling the truth, and that our hesitation often costs them far more than it protects us. We can take instincts seriously, our own and those of the people around us, because discomfort is information, because the body knows, because a person standing in a dim hallway at a birthday party should never have to calculate whether speaking up will cost them more than staying silent.
And we can hold space for the truth that healing is not linear, that recovery does not happen on a schedule, and that the bravest thing a person can sometimes do is simply decide to keep going. Rachel kept going. She is still going, and she agreed to let her story be told, carefully and with dignity, because she believed it might reach someone who needed to hear it. If this story stayed with you, if it made you feel something or think about something differently, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Stories like Rachel's matter. They matter because they are real, because they happen in living rooms and hallways and family gatherings all over this country, and most of the time they happen in silence. Your share might be the thing that breaks that silence for someone.
Drop the word awareness in the comments if you believe that silence protects abusers. Let's fill the comment section. And before you go, if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. We cover stories that matters, stories that don't always make the front page, but live in the lives of real people every single day. Thank you for watching. Thank you for coming. See you in the next one.